Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic and CLNS Media. Today on the show, we have a bit of a new beginning here on the Game Theory Podcast because from now until, I would say, just generally the future, we're going to have at least one weekly guest who is going to come on once a week on this show and one of the three shows, and we're going to talk about generally youth player development within college basketball and the NBA. I can't think of anyone better to do that with than Cole Zwicker. Cole, first and foremost, how's it going, man? It's, you haven't been on the podcast since pre-draft stuff, but you and I go back and forth pretty regularly on ideas. So I figured I'd give you a chance to introduce yourself again to the audience and, tell the people where they can find your work, tell the people what's going on in your life.
Sure. I mean, it's NBA Eve, so I'm ready for the regular season starting tomorrow. Really amped for that. Good to get back and do the entire evaluation process and all that. If you aren't familiar with my work, I write a lot for the Step Back, NBA draft-related stuff. I'm still going to continue to write for them, but we also just launched our own draft site that is going, or we didn't launch yet, but we are going to within the next month or so. It's going to be called the Stepien. So we're going to fixate on NBA prospects, kind of what we're covering on this podcast, in college, kind of that whole evaluation process, maybe even some AAU stuff, as well as in the NBA, just evaluating our evaluations a couple years into the process. So look for that in the Stepien. And yeah, I'm happy to be here doing the podcast with you once a week. I think it'll be fun. I've been really enjoyed our sessions, especially before the draft last year, going over your top 10, did a little summer league. So yeah, just happy to be here, man.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. And like I said, to me, Cole is one of the smarter people around in terms of evaluating these players. And I'm excited to see the Stepien. And just in terms of my work now, I would say that for the time being, obviously you can read my work on The Athletic, but a lot of The Athletic stuff is going to be college basketball related. So I would say that for the time being, if you're looking for any sort of NBA draft work from me, it's probably going to come in the form of this podcast. So I would try and keep it locked here for that if that's what you're interested in. If you're trying to, kind of get my take on prospects, kind of trying to get my take on the background on what's going on in some of these situations, this is probably the best place that you're going to get it, to be honest. Before we get into some draft stuff, and we're going to do a little bit of draft stuff today, we're going to talk about some lead guards. I might ask Cole a little bit about Jared Vanderbilt's injury, about a couple of the injuries we've seen so far in college basketball. But before we get there, I wanted to ask Cole about two very specific things that happened, and they fall on very divergent parts of the spectrum, right? So one is Joel Embiid's contract extension. He gets a 5-year max at $148 million. There are some interesting guarantee clauses there that we'll get into, as well as the Wade Baldwin decision where the Memphis Grizzlies, just 1 year into his rookie deal, have decided to cut him. So before we get into Baldwin, let's start with Joel Embiid, because Embiid, to me, is maybe the most interesting player in the entire NBA. Because we have this unicorn, and I think that you can genuinely call him that is just so rare in terms of talent, but has only played 31 NBA games in 3 years. I mean, I don't think that Hassan Whiteside was wrong in talking shit to Joel Embiid, saying that he'd only played 31 games in 3 years. So what were your initial impressions of the Joel Embiid maximum contract extension by the Philadelphia 76ers, Cole?
Well, I think at first part, it just comes down to how you evaluate and assess risk. That was the initial reaction. People would be like, oh, this is too extreme. This guy's played 31 games. Why would you give him that much money? And then you look at the contract, and yeah, it's probably going to be guaranteed. I don't know if that's the likelihood, but this isn't the NFL in terms of contracts. You only see $84 million guaranteed out of the maximum based on a pre-existing injury clause that we do not see very often. That occurred with Andrew Bynum, and of course he was waived for that. So those two select injuries that were fixated and pinpointed on in the contract, you just don't see that a lot. But my overarching takeaway is that we're talking about potentially the best player in the NBA. Like the sample that we have is a limited sample, but in those 31 games, he looks like a generational dominant player. The entire point of the draft, the entire point of team building is to acquire a player like this. So once you already have him, and there's at least a percentage chance that he stays healthy and he is that player, it's a no-brainer for me because you don't find these guys. This is a generational talent. So for me, it's worth the risk because if he's not, then who really is that isn't like a solidified star with a perfect, past of health, perfect background of health? Like,
Sure.
yeah, James Harden, sure, you'll lock him up for the max. There's going to be some risk in a lot of these guys. Like Andrew Wiggins, I think that contract's risky. I mean, I don't think he's a bust like a lot of people do, but that contract carries as much risk because there's a chance that he never becomes the player that some people think he can be. And I think that's a pretty decent chance that he never becomes a superstar, right? And so that's also a risky proposition. It's just seen more like that with Embiid because of the health, but at least we've seen a sample from him that says, I am a superstar if I'm healthy.
So, yeah, I just kind of want to give details on what the exact parameters are of this Joel Embiid contract. So, if Embiid misses 25 games or plays fewer than 1,650 minutes in the 2018-19 season, which is going to be the year where this contract kicks in, the 76ers could waive him and be on the hook for only $84 million of that $146 million. That amount increases, I believe, on the same kind of ballpark parameters of injury protection. That increases to $98.2 million after the 2019-20 season, $113 million after the 2021 season, and $129 million after the 21-22 season. So the Sixers have really done a great job of kind of building in protection just in case this thing turns sour, and I think that there's a genuine chance that it turns sour. But I agree with you. I think that, this contract to me is equally as, I guess, risky as the Wiggins contract. And I'm someone that I think I'm even higher on Wiggins than you are. But I think it's very fair to say that Joel Embiid, what we've seen from him so far is he has a chance to be the best player in the entire NBA. That's not an exaggeration. He genuinely has that ability. With Wiggins, I think I would be surprised if he was ever that good. I do think that he will live up to the contract, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to find here is surplus value. And there's really no more important player in the NBA than getting surplus value from a generational superstar, as you said. So Just getting a chance to get Embiid under this contract and protecting yourself for right around 40% of it is a really valuable commodity to me. And I think that at the end of the day, if I was the 76ers, would I have, the argument here is, should you wait until restricted free agency to do this deal, or should you decide to just get it done now? If you wait until restricted free agency, what you're potentially giving up is you're potentially giving up years of team control, because a team could sign Joel Embiid to an offer sheet of 4 years. What is it? Right around $110 million, something in that range, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So they could do that, and they could build in a player option after year 3, and you'd only get 3 years of team control versus 5 years of team control. So is it worth, building in the guarantee insurance now, or is it worth giving up the player control later? At the end of the day, I actually like this decision from the 76ers. I think it actually makes a lot of sense, even if I do understand some of the hesitation that people have due to the injury history.
Well, yeah, and let's just walk the scenarios through. Let's say that they didn't extend him and he plays a majority of the games this year. Let's say he plays 60, 65 games. He looks like what we've already seen. A team is going to throw a max offer at him. He's going to get some kind of, bait there. Whether it be a developmental team or whatnot, he's going to get some kind of a max offer if he proves himself to be somewhat healthy this year.
And if that's the case, by the way, he is 100% going to take the restricted free agency offer from another team, the offer sheet, and be able to get to that second contract in year 7. Because as we learned with Gordon Hayward this year, the Hayward deal, why he was able to get a bigger jump in money is because he was in that 7-year to 9-year band of maximum contract space, which gives you 5% more of your team's salary cap space. And then this is all assuming that Joel Embiid, for whatever reason, would not make All NBA this year, of course.
Yeah, and so an offer sheet could be 2+1, even like the Chandler Parsons deal. So it could basically just be, if the Sixers match, it could only be 2 years. They could also tender a maximum qualifying offer, but the caveat to that is it has to be 5 years and fully guaranteed. So they lose all the protection they just built into this contract by doing that, because Embiid would likely accept that, right? If he got offered 5 years fully guaranteed at the max by the Sixers just to get that extra year. So offer sheets would have to be 3 years minimum instead of 2. I think he would. But like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as you lose years either way. Like you're losing at least 1 year, maybe 2, and you're losing the protection. So I think, again, if Embiid in that situation, would Philly actually tender that full maximum qualifying offer? I have no idea. I mean, if they weren't willing to give him an extension at fully guaranteed, maybe not. I don't know. But that's what we're looking at as far as alternatives. So this was a good contract. This was a favorable team contract to what we see typically with NBA contracts. Again, this is not the NFL where there's like a huge signing bonus portion. A lot of it's non-guaranteed. The NBA pillars itself on guaranteed contracts. So the fact that Embiid, for a superstar level talent, is not fully protected, that has to say something about, give testament to the fact that the Sixers know what they're doing. I think that they did really well for themselves with this contract.
Yeah, I agree. I think this was kind of a very smart decision, and to me it's a no-brainer as long as you can build in the protection like this. On the other end of the spectrum, let's move to Wade Baldwin. The Memphis Grizzlies have decided to waive Wade Baldwin just a year after selecting him, I believe, number 17 overall. Is that number correct? Number 17 overall. It's a shocking decision to me. They've decided to keep Mario Chalmers over him, Andrew Wiggins over him. Jarrell Martin is another name that they have kept over him. Obviously, both Ivan Rabb and Dylan Brooks they have kept over him. You know what? I do think that Wade Baldwin right now is worse than probably all of those players. Maybe not Ivan Rabb, maybe not Deontay Davis, and maybe not. He's probably worse than Dylan Brooks right now, but nonetheless, like, he's probably in their ballpark. What was your initial reaction to this decision? Because my reaction was very negative when I first saw this news.
Mine, initially, it was just basically the character flags that I heard about. You know much more about this than I do. They seem to be true, right? I mean, there's only so many reasons why you would cut somebody with this kind of draft pedigree 1 year in. I know they're trying to win now. Memphis is a very win-now team with Marcus Gasol and Mike Conley as their entrenched veteran players. But it's really rare to see a team give up on this high of a draft pick. So it really does give credence to the reports that you hear about Baldwin being stubborn, cocky, doesn't listen, doesn't take advice. He's not that coachable. Maybe they just saw this guy isn't very good right now. We're trying to win now. And if he's not going to respond to, teachings and coaching, what's the point in really keeping this guy around? That was my initial thought.
So I agree with you, and I can kind of talk about that a little bit more. So coming into the draft process, Wade Baldwin was known as a guy who was exceedingly headstrong, exceedingly smart, but that intelligence almost led itself to kind of thinking that he knew better than coaching staffs and stuff like that. At least that was what I had been told from NBA teams, right? It's not that he is like this terrible dude. It's just that he is, he's immature, if that makes sense. And part of developing as a player is certainly being mature enough to take coaching and being mature enough to, understand your weaknesses and figure out how to best position yourself to get on the floor. And I think that is something that Wade Baldwin has very clearly failed at, given that they're cutting him at this stage, and given the general lack of development that we saw from him over the course of last season, whenever he got his opportunities, and over the course of Summer League this year, where he wasn't very good at all, I didn't think. Having said that, Wade Baldwin is I think his athleticism, in terms of his actual evaluation, I think that he is a little bit of a fake athlete, like in terms of what his testing numbers will say. Like, he jumps out of the gym and he, looks super quick. I think that, in the run of play, he doesn't necessarily play as athletically as he tests. I think that one big factor for him that went a little bit underreported throughout the draft process, he was not a very good jump shooter off of the dribble. Whenever he entered the NBA from Vanderbilt, he was really, really good off the catch, and his numbers from three-point range were right around like 40% both years, I believe. But a lot of that stuff, again, came off the catch, and to be a lead guard in the NBA, you really have to be able to knock down shots off the dribble, and he just wasn't really fluid enough to do that. I always saw him as more of like a backup combo guard than a potential starter, but I did think he would eventually get to the point where he would be able to reach that level. What were your initial evaluations on Wade Baldwin, and where do you kind of stand on him as a player right now?
I saw him as pretty similar kind of archetype, a 3-and-D kind of lead guard. You don't want him initiating your offense every time. I just don't think his feel for the game is that great either as a playmaker. He can do some things, make reads and like spread pick and roll, but I didn't really like his basketball IQ. That was something that even transcended over to summer league play, where he just didn't look like a second-year guy who's a point guard should look. He didn't have that kind of command of the game. He's really turnover prone. The shooting off the dribble stuff, absolutely. That's part of the reason in the evaluation in college I didn't view him as like that every kind of league guard type. He's not like dynamic pull-up shooter. So I wanted to pair him with someone like, not like LeBron, of course, but some kind of primary initiator that was a wing type. And I thought he would do really well in that. He can guard point of attack. He's really strong, got like an ideal build for like a combo-ish guard, really great length. When he competes, he's pretty quick. I agree. He's not quite the functional athlete that his numbers would make him out to be on the floor.
Really poor finisher at the rim as well.
Yes, and I just thought he was the kind of player that you could find on a winning basketball team if he would figure out his basketball awareness a little bit more. I mean, just not like a primary creator type, but a secondary guy who could shoot, play defense. Those guys are usually valuable in some capacity. The shooting is, he was like, 3 of 22 from 3 last year in the NBA in that limited sample. I think he's a better shooter than that. I think that you can trust him to, in time, he can be an off-the-catch shooter. And if he can defend and he exerts high energy level there, I think he can be a rotation player in the league. I don't see this as someone who is like not talented enough to play in the NBA. That's never what I've really thought. Yeah,
I think the talent is there, and I kind of want to bring up a couple of factors here that worry me from an organizational standpoint if I'm Memphis, right? Like, I think that Memphis thinks that they can compete like for an Eastern, like to make a decision like this, like it's almost like you have to be able to compete for an Eastern Conference Finals berth to me. Like, I think that if you can get to that level, even it's worthwhile. I don't think they're anywhere near that, to be frank. Like, I'm not certain they're a playoff team this year. Like, I think that many would probably go against that. Now, I'm a little bit more bullish on them making the playoffs than some, I think, but there are a lot of statistical projections out there, and I've seen very few that actually have Memphis in the playoffs right now. So I think that from an organizational perspective, what has happened here is that they're prioritizing the now versus the later when they aren't really good enough to be doing that. Number 2, I think that the way they have attacked the second round in the last few years has been problematic in a lot of ways. So the Chris Wallace archetype of guys that he takes chances on are really, really high level, high school prospects who don't necessarily pan out in college, right? Like the Ivan Rabs, the Josh Selbys, the Andrew Harrisons, for instance. He loves those guys and thinks that, maybe, and this doesn't come from any interaction with him, but this comes from just what his archetype of player is. He thinks he can fix those guys and thinks that those guys have natural talent, right? That somehow his guys can harness. We have not ever seen them harness that type of player. Over the last however many years, I think it's like since 2001, the Grizzlies have tendered a second contract to their first round pick once. I believe it was Mike Conley. Like, it's crazy to me how poor this team has been at developing their players over the course of the last, decade and a half. Like, to get that little production out of the NBA draft is just mind-numbing. And it's exceedingly problematic for the way that you run an organization. The third part of this is, a lot of this has to do with why teams stash players, right? Teams stash players so that they can keep a asset overseas that they can allow to mature and develop. Taking guys like Ivan Rabb, Deontay Davis, Andrew Harrison, Dylan Brooks, guys who are going to battle for a contract on your team immediately, that creates these kinds of roster crunches, right? Those are roster crunches that a lot of teams don't really like to deal with necessarily, because you're always going to end up losing an asset in that way, right? Now, you could also argue that they did try and stash. They tried to stash Rade Zagarats. They bring Rade Zagarats over, and they end up having to cut him this year. Do you know how insane it is that they brought over Rade Zagarats after taking Dylan Brooks and Ivan Rabb and having to have Andrew Harrison battle for a job and having Wade Baldwin have to battle for a job? Bring him over, try and have him make the team, and then have to cut him. Why wouldn't you just keep him stashed overseas? Why wouldn't you just let him grow and develop with Mega or put him in another different situation? It is the way that this team has handled the NBA draft over the course of the last few years, and I loved the 2016 draft at the time. I thought that they got 3 of my top 30 players in the draft or so by selecting Deontay Davis, Wade Baldwin, and Rade Zagarats. That was, potentially really useful to me. But the way that they've handled the draft process has left them in a really bad situation, in my opinion, where they have now these 3 pieces that are very project-y pieces. Like Wade Baldwin was a project, as you mentioned. Deontay Davis was absolutely a project throughout the draft process, and that's why he ended up falling. Rade Zagarats, his body is a project to get him to NBA level. But whenever you take guys that are more ready, like a Dylan Brooks or something like that, or an Andrew Harrison, whose body is ready to play in the NBA, you set those guys up for failure because they're going to look worse and end up putting you in a situation where you have to make a decision on cutting them. So it's just a really, really poorly run front office situation from what I've seen. And I find it hard to believe that they would put themselves, that any NBA organization would put themselves in this situation.
I feel like the most overlooked part of the entire evaluation process is by far player development. I mean, you look at all the talented draft picks, but how they are cultivated ultimately makes the world difference. Is Pat McCaw the same player he is with Golden State with another franchise? Is Jordan Bell going to be? No. It's the fact that those guys get cultivated, they get developed in a certain way with franchises that know what they're doing. They know how to attack the draft. They know how to attack what they want. They can identify skills and mindsets that are valuable to them, and they can cultivate those. And I agree with you.
To me, it seems like Memphis is just throwing darts at a board of top 10 former high school players and saying, sure, this guy works.
And yeah, that seems like what their strategy is. I think it's a great point, and I maybe there is some value in that. I know obviously it hasn't been for them, but maybe in a vacuum that works sometimes. But it just doesn't feel like this being the 4th or 5th year of what I've recognized as that too. It's a sustainable strategy. It can't be. I have a question for you though. If you were another team and you had an open roster spot, would you claim Wade Baldwin?
So here's what I would say about that. If I was a team that had an open roster spot and had any sort of need for had the ability to claim his contract, I probably would, because I find getting a former first round pick under contract, under his rookie contract, immensely valuable if you have any faith in him, because, Wade Baldwin will still have 3 years left on his rookie contract. And then you'll have his restricted free agency rights if things go right with him as a player. In terms of talent, if I was the Bulls, I would probably claim him. They're the island of misfit point guards right now with Chris Dunn, and Cameron Payne is still on that roster. And Jaren Grant is still on that roster. Ryan Arcidiacono is their backup point guard right now. So if I was them, I'd probably say, sure, yeah, give me a chance. Give Wade a chance and go for it. I think they also just claimed Kay Felder off of waivers. So if I was the Bulls, I would claim Wade Baldwin and say, hey, I'm going to give you a shot. You can play backup point guard for us. You can try and learn a spread pick and roll system under Fred Hoiberg where you're going to have shooting on the floor from the forward positions at all times. And we're going to see what happens. But, do I think he's for sure an NBA player? No. But I think that maybe he's a risk that teams that are in need of high variance assets could maybe take a shot on.
Yeah, I'm 100% in lockstep with all of that. It's interesting for me because I think that teams would probably try to play him at point guard. I'm more curious and if a team would be like, we see more value in just developing you how you're going to be optimized, and that's mostly off the ball. So play you next to another guy who can initiate, maybe at the 2. And that's kind of the issue I see with Chris Dunn, too. We've talked about this in the past. Maybe if he doesn't work out at point guard, there's a lot of flags there. You can move off ball, develop a spot-up jumper. Wade Baldwin's way more proficient as a shooter than Chris Dunn is off ball, but just kind of the same general stylistic approach to how they're going to be optimized on the floor as more 3-and-D guys. So it'd be nice to see a team be like, Wade, we want to play you off ball. We want you to compete your ass off at the point of attack, really defend point guards, spot up off ball. We're going to simplify things down for you so it's not a bunch of, heavy reads. You're not running this advanced pick and roll system. It's going to be motion offense where it's pass, screen away, that kind of stuff. If he can be placed in a system like that really just refines what he has to do, I think that his 2 main skills could be brought out in that circumstance. I'm just kind of worried that he's not going to get claimed right away, or if he does, he's going to be played in the same kind of role, and he's going to struggle with being a lead ball handler for the reasons we've already mentioned. You know what?
I 100% agree with that. But at the end of the day, a guy like Wade Baldwin, you can throw him at the 2 and you can just have more ball handling on the floor. You know what I mean? Like, it never hurts to have guys who can create with the ball a little bit. And if he can ever shoot off the catch, it's a really valuable skill set, I think. And the key is, we can talk for days about what the skill is. The key is that this needs to be a wake-up call for Baldwin, right? Like, he needs to now understand, I need to go in if a team claims me, if not, if I get signed, whatever, I have to go in with a chip on my shoulder. I have to go in and be willing to listen to the coaches in trying to develop my game. I do think that he has enough talent to play in the NBA. It's just all going to be about mindset. He needs to have the right mindset to play in the NBA right now. And, clearly he didn't in Memphis, but we'll see.
I mean, now it's like, it's nothing certain now. When you get drafted, it's like, oh, I got 4 years, sometimes not, but most of the time draft picks are around the team for 4 years, and you develop over time. Now it's like fish or cut bait. You know what I mean? It's time. You're going to be out of the league. Like, there's not a huge margin for error when you're on the precipice of being in or out of the NBA, because teams move on really quickly. So, yeah, it has to be an eye-opening experience for him and a wake-up call.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the NBA draft. But before we do that, I have an advertisement for you. This episode is sponsored by Greats, makers of the all-time greats, classic, stylish, and comfortable sneakers sold at a great price. Cole, do you like stylish and comfortable sneakers?
I do.
Yeah, I am a big fan of them too. Greats is Brooklyn's first sneaker company. They sell all the greats, classic styles made for the best, for less. Wide selection of men's and women's shoes. There are versatile styles suitable for any occasion. Tons of different colors and materials to choose from. Their best sellers include the all-leather Royale lace-up and Worcester slip-on. They sent me a pair, all whites. These things look cool. They're stylish. They're leather. I can actually wear them to like real events, like weddings and stuff, because I only own tennis shoes. I don't really have a nice pair of shoes. So them sending me these shoes was actually very functional as well. You can check those out along with lots of other styles at greats.com. And we've got a special deal for our audience. Save 15% on your first order with our offer code Game Theory. That's GAMETHEORY. All one word. Go to greats.com. That's GREATS.com. And be sure to choose Game Theory to save 15% at checkout. Greats also believe so much in their shoes. They offer a no-risk return and exchange policy to guarantee that you get the right fit in a style you love. That's greats.com, and use our code Game Theory and save 15%. Thanks to Greats for sponsoring the podcast. Now let's get back to the show. We're going to talk about lead guards. In this episode, we're going to talk about guys like Collin, Sexton, Trevon, Duval, and some others who are very, at least interesting to me entering the year. But I think that my biggest takeaway on this lead guard class is that, entering the year last year, I had 5 guys in my top 15 or so that really stood out. And I think all 5 of those guys were taken in the top 11 of the NBA draft. Now, this year, I have 6 guys in the top 50 for me on my NBA draft board currently. It's a much weaker crop of point guards in terms of depth. Where do you stand on this point guard class before we get into some of the guys that are here?
I think that's the takeaway, is that the depth isn't there. The high, I should not say overall depth, that too, but the high ceiling outcome depth is not nearly the same as the last class. You don't have 4 or 5 guys that are going to go top 10, top 11. It's more... Collin Sexton stands out as the guy who's really performed every level that we've seen him at in lower levels. Trevon Duval, he's one of the biggest swing guys in the entire class for me, just because there is such high variance with the shooting. If he hits, it's going to be big. But you're really relying on those two to really carry the weight in the lottery. And I think that's kind of the negative perception, or a microcosm of the negative perception in this class at times, is because you don't have that same kind of primary creator equity at the lead guard position specifically. So I think that's why a lot of people were higher on the last class, is because you had the De'Aaron Foxes, you had Lonzo, Fultz, Smith, like a bevy of point guards you could see as primary creators. And there's just a lot more questions with these guys.
Yeah, and I think that kind of stands up for this NBA draft as a whole, right? We all feel pretty good about the top 8 or 9 or 10 guys in this draft, but at the end of the day, once you get past that, it gets really hard to find guys that you're certain are going to go in the first round. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I'm not really certain what NBA teams think about this draft, especially, which is what matters ultimately, because they're the people selecting these players. I'm actually a pretty big fan of the class, but there is, again, more high variance in some of the prospects. Like, the idea of a lot of them is really good. Will they live up to that is a different story.
Yeah, so let's kind of start with the top two guys here, because Collin Sexton, to me, I think he's probably a bit more of a sure thing than Trevon Duval, but I think Trevon Duval probably has a little bit more talent, to be frank, but we'll start with Sexton. Sexton is 6'2", has a 6'6" wingspan, right around 185 pounds. Really interesting style of game, right? He is a little bit more of a scorer right now than a distributor, but he showed off some distributor tendencies, I think, throughout the exhibition season, Hoop Summit, McDonald's All-American Game, some of those other All-Star events. He was a little bit more cognizant, I think, of getting his teammates involved in those situations, and I think it was an interesting development in his game. He showed some pretty solid vision, if not necessarily a ton of crazy flash with his passes. The biggest thing that stands out with him, though, which, we'll get to the rest of his game in a second, this kid is maybe the most competitive player outside of Josh Jackson that I've ever seen live. This kid gets after it in a big way. He wants to demolish you at the point of attack defensively. He wants to just break your will by getting into the lane offensively with his ridiculous ball handling and his lightning quick first step. He wants to break your spirit every time he steps on the basketball floor, and I love that.
He's really the most entertaining competitor I've seen for a prospect. He does it with like a certain flair too, like a certain gravitas when he competes. It's not like just like a pure asshole approach. He makes it like engaging. I just find him really fun. I think that's his competitive fire is really going to appeal to a lot of teams, just in the way it's conveyed. So that's definitely my number one takeaway with Collin Sexton is just that competitiveness, that he has that it factor that you just don't see in a lot of prospects.
So in terms of his game, the things that stand out to me most are the first step and the ball handling ability, right? Like he has the ability to change pace, change directions, and he has the lightning quick first step to blow by defenses. Particularly, he'll use like a hesitation, like hang dribble move where he'll lull the defense to sleep and then just blow by with that first step. That is really, really effective. Probably still a little bit more comfortable in the mid-range right now than rather than from three-point range, although I think he's working on that and kind of getting to the point where he can knock down threes consistently. I just feel faithful that this guy is going to be a really effective college basketball player this year, and I think that, when projecting him to the NBA level, it's very easy to see a role for him just as an offensive creator that also really gets after it defensively. He's tough. He's long. There's just skills that every NBA team can use.
Absolutely. I mean, his ability to create space, like you said, off the dribble, it really stands out. I know he did a ton of that in high school because he had a huge offensive creation burden for himself. But like you noted also, at Hoop Summit, he really showed some pick and roll poise, played with good pace. He could make reads. That was really impressive. I came into that having watched a little bit of his high school tape, and I was like, this guy's kind of an undersized chucker. Obviously, he can get to his spots. He's super dynamic with the ball. But does he have any kind of feel? And he really stood out. And we talked about this, I think, when we did a podcast in the past about Hoop Summit, but this is a guy who won basically every 4-on-4 shell drill, every 5-on-5. Sexton was usually the main contributor to that winning team. And I'm not sure how much it means in the grand totality of things, but it definitely means something, I think, just for projecting him. There's a reason that guy excels on the floor with his mindset and his skill level. I think the pull-up game is going to be huge for him. It's not something I'm not that confident in it yet. I know he can create space. Can he actually shoot efficiently off the dribble? That's going to be a huge thing. I'm not too concerned about the size. He's a little bit undersized, but he's long enough, and he competes to kind of compensate for that. So also about finishing, I know he can get to the rim with the burst and the handle to navigate tight spaces.
Yep.
How good of a vertical athlete is he? He's not Trevon Duval in terms of speed to power, finishing through contact. So he's probably going to have to develop some kind of craft, and he looks like he's capable of doing that. He had a couple really nice finishes at Hoop Summit, but that's just another area to monitor. Yeah,
whereas Duval has that thick, powerful frame, Sexton is more wiry. It doesn't look like he's going to put on a crazy amount of strength and power throughout the course of his career. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the precise takeaway. He's not small enough to where I'm concerned, but you just have to see a little bit more finishing craft, some ambidexterity, some creativity there to feel confident projecting him as kind of a 3-level scorer type.
So I have Sexton as a top 10 pick, and barring, off the court stuff, I think really, I would be surprised if he fell out of the lottery, to be honest. He's just like that skilled kind of in this draft. We're just looking for so many players right now that just given where his talent is right now, again, barring anything off the floor, it's hard for me to see a player that's this talented in a league so dominated by perimeter players just kind of fall off. It's hard for me to see how he fails.
I agree. And I mean, you have to consider the fact that not every team in the lottery is going to need a big, and that's where the depth in this class is at the 5 position. And not every team's going to need one of those. Some teams are going to need point guards. And right now, Sexton looks like not only the safest bet, but maybe the highest upside play depending on what we see from Duval shooting.
So yeah, I want to talk about Duval because to me, I think he can be a top 5 pick in this class. You mentioned the idea of transitioning, quickness horizontally to power vertically. I can't really remember a point guard prospect who did that as easily as Duval does. Because even a guy like Dennis Smith, who is so explosive, and he's more wiry explosive. Duval is powerful explosive. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think that's the comparison that most people are going to go to right away when seeing him. It's hard to judge the athleticism gap just because Smith doesn't have the same kind of positional size or length that Duval does. So Duval has more length, so it might look like he's a better athlete. I still think that Smith probably is, but Duval's definitely more like he'll run through you more consistently, even though I think that's really underrated part of Dennis Smith's game is just his ability to explode through guys.
Well, yeah, I think that Dennis is more explosive. I think that Duval's a little bit more powerful. You know what I mean? They're different athletes. That impresses me with Duval. His creativity impresses me. Now, we'll get to that whenever we talk about some of the issues with his game, but he thinks the game very differently, especially in the open floor. He's a very creative passer. He's a very creative ball handler who, he has every trick in the book in terms of handling the ball. It's really, really impressive. Shooting is a worry. Decision-making is the biggest worry to me. Even if he can't shoot, I think that he can probably get by. If he starts making these terrible fucking decisions that he makes sometimes on the basketball floor, where he'll just throw a behind-the-back pass into a crowd of 3, or just throw it 10 feet over a guy's head out of bounds, which I've seen before at Nike Basketball Academy, for instance, out here in L.A., I believe in 2016. He can do so much, but he needs to understand to play a little bit more within himself, I think, than he does, because he does have all of the natural gifts that one needs. He just needs to harness those gifts and make it into a more consistent, positive play instead of the spectacular play.
His handle is fantastic. Like you noted, the tight dribble, he can really get low and sink low in traffic. He can just break guys down. I mean, that's the best way to put it. In space, in the half court, he can really, blow by pretty much anybody because
Big
of his
part
handle.
Of that,
burst.
6'10" wingspan.
Yes, he's got the burst as well. So he's athletic. He can explode around the rim relatively well, like we noted. For me, it's just again that intersection of the lack of shooting. He kind of shoots a set shot off the dribble, kind of to the side of his body, and it doesn't look that fluid. Watching him try to shoot in a game setting, I'm not comfortable with it yet. And like you noted, the biggest the biggest issue for me is the decision making can get super wild on some passes, and that's a really important combination to have for your point guard. You need to be able to shoot in the modern game, and if you don't make good decisions, that's a pretty big red flag. So that's kind of where I come from with Duval. Is we can see the positives, we can see the upside, but these two glaring issues are in fact very glaring issues that need to be resolved. Maybe we'll see a better version, a better iteration of him at Duke. But he has, similar to some other guys like DeAndre Ayton with his motor, he has a lot to answer at the college level.
Yeah, you mentioned the shot. He shoots it legitimately, at least he did in high school, from his right ear, it seems like. He brings it to the right side of his head instead of shooting it more in front of his face, which is problematic. It's hard for me with Duval because we haven't even mentioned the body control yet. He has such a ridiculous combination of explosiveness, quickness, and body control that again, like I really can't remember that player who's had all of that and then mixes it with power and the transfer of, quickness to power as quickly as he does. He's a really remarkable talent to me in terms of just the athletic build and the athleticism and the handle and just being able to create plays. But, the questions are playmaking and playmaking and decision making and shooting. And in a game that is so, dominated by skill now and skill level, it's concerning that he would be, as problematic as he is in those ways sometimes on the basketball floor. Where do you kind of think he falls in this class? Because, I have him as a top 10 guy right now. Like I said, I think he can be a top 5 guy. I think he could fall, to the 20s if he doesn't show well this year. He's a complicated player to me.
I agree. I have him right now. I have him outside of lottery just until he shows more acumen in those two areas we discussed. I'm just, again, very low and very skeptical on kind of scheme-breaking offensive players in the lead guard where guys are going to duck under every pick and roll. If you can't make good decisions, if you're not like Ricky Rubio who can really make elite-level decisions, it's just hard to build an offense around that because you're not going to play him too much off the ball if he's not an off-ball threat. And is it worth all of the issues that a player like that causes in the NBA specifically? So if you're a really great finisher, and he has really great traits, like we noted, the ability to get into the lane, finish, convert speed to power, that element, you can still work with that in some settings. I'm not going to write him off. I think he is enough of a player in those respects to take a dice roll on, even though he does have warts. But I'm more skeptical of this kind of player, and that's how I'll kind of start the evaluation process. And if he shows these things, I'm willing to move him way up. I think the upside's pretty considerable. It's just so is the downside.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Before we kind of move forward into this class, those are the two clear top guys for you as well, I would imagine, right?
Correct.
So where do you think Bruce Brown kind of fits into this? Because, he started playing off-ball a lot last year at Miami, but by the time Jaquan Newton got suspended at the beginning of February, he transitioned a lot more into an on-ball lead role. And I was kind of impressed, actually, with what I saw. He was a very rudimentary decision maker, but he was a smart decision maker whenever he was placed in pick and roll actions. A smart passer, not necessarily like a guy who has all of the passes in his toolbox yet, but I liked a decent amount of what I saw from Brown, at least enough to kind of ask you what you think of him as a lead guard at the next level. I think we both believe he can be an NBA player. It's more in the capacity of a lead guard, if what I'm asking.
That's really interesting. I mean, he doesn't really have a pull-up game. He doesn't do anything from the mid-range as far as pulling up. He's much more comfortable.
I can give you numbers here. He took 34 jump shots off the dribble last year. He hit 4 of them. He was ranked in the 4th percentile of all college basketball players in jump shots off the dribble.
See, and that's kind of what I'm getting at with the whole lead ball handler stuff, because that's a huge element and a huge dynamic to that game. I love Bruce Brown as a secondary handler for the reasons you noted. I think he's a really smart player. He can run a secondary pick and roll action. He can spot up well enough when he has time and space. I think he can be a plus three-point shooter in time. But the lead guard stuff is a bit much for me at this juncture. I don't think he has that dynamic of a handle. I mean, he's got a workable handle for sure. He's got good burst. He can actually use screens relatively well. He rejects. He shows some comfort there. So I'm the same as you. I'm impressed with him. But as an archetype, I would kind of pigeonhole him more into the secondary handler 3-and-D types, like a D'Anthony Melton. There's a lot of those guys in this class, so I really like them as players. I just don't really have a ton of confidence in them being your de facto or your full-time lead guard. Well,
we'll talk about some of those guys later, like maybe next week or something like that. But, Shake Milton to me is kind of another guy who fits in that mold. But
yes.
Do you think he, has a little bit more lead ball handling ability? I don't think he's clearly not as athletic as Brown, but he does have the jump shooting ability. I think he's actually a little bit more of a natural passer than Brown is. Do you think that he can fit as a lead guard in today's NBA?
I do, more so than Brown. Again, putting him around somebody like a wing initiator type. Like if a team took Luka Doncic and then took Shake Milton in the same draft, that would make a lot of sense to me because Doncic is going to initiate a lot of your offense and Milton can do it sometimes. You don't really want him doing it full time. That's just that's a high bar, at least for me personally. Primary creation is a really high bar to meet. Like in the last class, we even had questions about Lonzo Ball being fully capable of doing that. Fultz was, Smith was, Fox was to a certain extent. So it's tough. I think a lot of these guys fall in that area. I know you're not high on Andrew Jones. Same would kind of go for him. Kamar Baldwin of the Butler. I think that he could actually be a really valuable point of attack defender, and he can shoot off the dribble relatively well. He can spot up. Not ideal mechanics, but you kind of see what I'm getting at stylistically. This is a lot of secondary handler types. You can put them at the de facto lead guard because they can defend point guards, but you don't want them really initiating your offense every time.
So I guess that my next question for you is, who is a guy that you see in this class who you believe can actually be an offensive initiator in the NBA? Because I do struggle to kind of find that next guy who, I fully trust that can like handle the ball even as a backup by himself on the floor next to like two wings.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, outside of Doncic, are we talking just lead guards or wings too, or whatnot?
Let's say just lead guards, because like there are guys like I said, like Bruce Brown, Shake Milton. I'm trying to think of like some other guys that you could throw into that mix. Like I think Landry Shamet might not even be athletic enough to like play lead guard in the NBA. Kobe McEwen is kind of more of a combo-y guard than like a full-time lead guard. There are just so many of those guys in this class.
Yeah, and when I made my original list about point guards, I only had 3. We've already talked about the top 2. My third guy was actually Jalen Hands. I haven't seen enough of him to have like a concrete opinion on this, but I do like his pull-up game. He seems good enough with his size, kind of burst combination to get in the lane, maybe a primary creator. I think he can be probably a backup point guard. Whether he's a starter or not is going to depend on a lot of other factors. I don't have a good read on his decision-making and all that yet, but Jalen Hands was the third guy outside of Duval and Sexton where I saw kind of primary initiator consistently, equity potentially as a ceiling outcome.
Yeah, I think Jalen Hands is a good call there. He has a lot of downside in terms of decision making. He's a lot of downside in terms of just being able to shoot the ball consistently, and he has a lot of the same concerns that Trevon Duval has, but a little bit he just has less upside to me.
Yes,
so
I think that's exactly the way I approached it too.
I'll just kind of rip off some guys here that I have listed. I've got Bryant Crawford. I'm a little bit higher on him than I think you are. 16 points, 5 assists a game at Wake Forest. They play up tempo, so those numbers are probably a little bit inflated. He's really, really tough. He can knock down shots off the catch. Really smart passer, I would say, more than like an incredible passer. But, a guy that I think can at least grow into a potential backup point guard role in the NBA. Another guy that I have is Jalen Brunson. Like, I think Jalen Brunson is going to be a backup point guard in the NBA. Like, we're not talking like starter level players here. Like, I don't really think that there are a ton of guys that have that level of talent, but Jalen Brunson, to me, he's just so smart on the basketball floor. He can get in and out of offense very, very efficiently. His numbers in Big East play last year were outrageous. He averaged like 16 points a game on a 67% true shooting percentage. Really, really good distributor, really, really good passer, knows exactly where everyone needs to be on the floor at all times. Defensively, he's going to be a problem, but the key is that if he's a backup, you're likely not going to have a ton of backup point guards who are going to be able to consistently take advantage of that within the realm of a team defensive scheme. So, those are two guys that I look at. Devontae Graham as well is another guy, but we need to see how he handles playing point guard consistently as opposed to off guard a little bit more like he did throughout the last 2 years. But, those two guys, it gets tricky, man. It gets hard to find them.
Oh, for sure. And Brunson maybe has some TJ McConnell offensive equity in the league.
Yeah.
That same kind of player generally. I'm not saying they're exactly the same kind of player, but maybe that's his avenue to succeed. You've seen a lot more of this guy. I haven't seen a ton, but the athleticism certainly sticks out. Nick Weatherspoon. What are your thoughts on him?
I haven't seen a crazy amount of him, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The athleticism, like you mentioned, definitely sticks out. His Quindry's brother, which, maybe he has some of that, ability to just kind of knock down shots like Quindry has, like that, that mentality that he's going to go out and just beat the guy opposite him. Typically those mentalities kind of follow from family to family. I just haven't seen enough of him to give you a cogent evaluation on him.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm in the same ballpark. I've seen a little bit of his tape. He seems just intriguing the way he attacks the basket. I think his reputation is more maybe a gunner type of point guard who's just going to go out there and get shots up. If that's who he is, I'm kind of less intrigued, but he's definitely someone on the radar that I'm going to monitor this year.
Yeah, no, I'm going to monitor him. I'm going to monitor Marcus Howard at Marquette, if only because he might be the best shooter in the NCAA. Marcus Howard hit 55% of his threes last year as a freshman who was like 17 years old. I know that any sort of like advanced model that does draft projections has him incredibly high given his level of production for his age last year. Lamar Peters is a guy that coming out of Adidas Nations, you would hear some noise about. He performed really, really well at that camp at Mississippi State. Again, he's going to be with Quindry Weatherspoon and Nick Weatherspoon in the Mississippi State backcourt, but he got a lot of noise. He got a lot of coverage coming out of that event. He had a solid freshman year, if a little bit inconsistent and inefficient. Terrence Davis at Ole Miss is a guy that's always really interested me. I don't know if he's necessarily a lead, but he has really, really good handle. He's a late comer to basketball, which means maybe he still has a bit more untapped upside in terms of the way he thinks the game and feels the game. Although I think that can kind of go both ways sometimes. Like sometimes those guys who come to basketball late just never develop that feel for the game that players who have been playing it for their entire lives at a high level naturally just have. But, he's a guy who's explosive. He's athletic. He gets into the lane with ease. Do you have any other like kind of sleepers that you're looking at?
I had Davis as well, but I had him, again, more as a secondary guy. For point guards, that's basically it. I mean, Javon Carter's another 3-and-D guy. I don't know if I brought him up before.
I had two more, and he was one of them.
Yeah, that's my last one, really, so go ahead and do the other one.
Well, Javon Carter, I think, deserves like a quick little minute. Like, he's a guy who really has improved as a shooter. He's probably the best point of attack defender in all of college basketball. Really gets into passing lanes, really causes issues for opposing teams. I'm a big fan of what he does. Key is just offense. Like, does he have enough offense? I don't know if he really has enough in terms of creating with the ball in his hands. One guy who definitely has enough in terms of creating with the ball in his hands is Jalen Adams. Jalen Adams out of St. Bonaventure put up a stat line that in the last quarter century of college basketball, literally only he has put up. Like, it was like 21 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists, like 2 steals, and like a 63% true shooting percentage, like something along those lines. Genuinely only he has ever put that up in the last quarter century of college basketball. So he's someone that I'm watching because, you watch these point guards that tend to excel as backup point guards in the NBA. The one thing that I notice from them is they're really, really good shooters off the dribble, in large part because their ball pickup is a little bit better than other players because you get that just a split second to be able to get that shot off the dribble in the NBA. Adams' ball pickup off the dribble to get into his shooting motion is so quick and it's just so fluid that I think he's going to be effective as a shooter off the dribble basically at any level he plays at.
That's interesting. I honestly have not seen a minute of him, so I'll definitely keep him, in my database here going forward. Kind of similar to Frank Mason. I mean, that's why I liked him, is because it was off the dribble shooting. Like, he could really get it off quickly, and he's thrived so far. I mean, in Summer League he played well. He's looked pretty good in the preseason. So if you can have a specific skill set like that, you can be a valuable NBA player as a backup, for as valuable as backup point guards can be. Yeah,
I totally agree. Landry Shamet out of Wichita State is a guy to track. Like I said, I don't know if he's athletic enough to play point guard in the NBA, but he's tough and knocks down shots in the same way that Fred VanVleet did at Wichita State. Guy to track at the very least. You mentioned Andrew Jones. You think of Andrew Jones as more of a combo guard, right?
I do. Yeah, he was in my huge list of wings, like wing combo forwards. I mean, obviously he's more of a straight secondary handler wing type, but I think that's the depth in this class. If you haven't brought into that takeaway with what we've been talking about here today, like the listeners, the lead guard class, the equity there is there's like 2 or 3 guys that we're looking at as high level prospects, but the wing class, the secondary handler class, especially the 2-way guys, there's a lot of like those kinds of archetypes in this class. That and the 5s is the strength of the class, in my opinion.
Yeah, and a couple other freshmen to watch here. Trae Young is just a ridiculous shooter off the dribble. Not necessarily like a crazy athlete. Don't know if he's ever going to develop the explosiveness to play at that next level, but he's going to be awesome for Oklahoma this year, to be sure. Quade Green, really, really good distributor with the basketball, has improved as a jump shooter from beyond the arc over the course of his career. I'm just a little bit skeptical that he has the kind of burst that you consistently need to get into the lane in the NBA as a lead guard. Lindell Wigginton out of Canada will be playing for Iowa State this year. Really, really good pick and roll player. I think Steve Prohm's going to put him in an awesome situation. Spread pick and roll offenses. We've seen guys like Cameron Payne and Isaiah Cannon succeed in that same scheme. I think Lindell Wigginton and Monte Morris, I think, is another guy that we can point out. I think Lindell Wigginton can be the next guy to really excel in that spread pick and roll scheme. Matt Coleman out of Texas, he's going to take over for Andrew Jones as a point guard this year. He's going to throw a lot of lobs to Muhammad Bamba, and that's going to be fun. Beyond that, though, like you said, a lot of these guys are more combos, and I think we can talk about them at a different point. Maybe Cassius Winston as well at Michigan State. Cassius Winston, really, really good year last year as a distributor. Really, really turnover prone at times last year. So let's see how he develops, but he does have a lot of skill.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I saw more Quade Green at the Hoop Summit. He got injured, so we didn't get a huge sample of him. What do you think about Kentucky's kind of de facto point guard, or next to Quade Green, Shea? I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Shea Alexander, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about him?
I like him. I think he's more of a combo. Yes. NBA folks that have gone down there and seen them practice, they rave. They think that he can be really, really good. 6'6", 6'7", somewhere in that range. Really, really long. Shoots it really well. Has the ability to handle the ball and create a little bit for himself. But I think he's, again, more of a secondary creator than a primary creator. But it's definitely worth mentioning him as a guy that is a sneaky, kind of under the radar potential one and done guy.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, with their incoming class potentially the next year, he could definitely come out. I like a lot of elements of his game. I wasn't super sold on him watching him at Hoop Summit, but he did enough to where I think he's got a pretty good basketball IQ, and if he can shoot it all, you kind of see that tall point guard. There's going to be some advantages there as far as his ability to switch, and if he's intelligent enough, I think he can make it if he can shoot the ball.
Yeah. Well, Cole, we're going to talk about more of these combo guards, I think, next week. We'll give like Bruce Brown and Shake Milton and Devontae Graham and Kobe McEwen their day in the sun when we talk next time around. We'll also probably talk a little bit more than that, because I think that an NBA draft podcast based only around guys that are, maybe late first-round picks, maybe in Bruce Brown's case, a potential lottery pick, depending on how this year goes. Some of those guys I think are maybe not going to bring in the eyeballs to the podcast. But, Cole, what do you have coming up here work-wise? Tell the people where they can find you again.
Well, if you haven't registered for the Stepien newsletter, you can go to thestepien.com and just put your email address in there and confirm that, and you'll get our weekly newsletter for that. That's basically the only draft-related content I have going on right now. I'll probably end up writing for the Step Back a little bit this upcoming month, but for now, it's probably going to be this podcast. Similar to Sam, is going to be where you're going to hear my NBA draft-related thoughts. But again, sign up for the Stepien, and thanks for having me again, man.
Yeah, on my end, as always, please subscribe to The Athletic. I have a lot of really great content coming up over the course of the next few days. If you're listening to this, you're probably going to be able to read my Cincinnati preview, which went live on Tuesday. Or, maybe you're listening to it right when it comes out at like 1 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. Look for that preview. It's really, really fun. I had a great conversation with Mick Cronin. Really one of the most underrated fun guys to talk to in all of college basketball, because he has a lot of takes on things and he's really, really thoughtful whenever he gives those takes. Again, like I said, a lot of my draft stuff is going to be coming here, though. A lot of the stuff I do over on The Athletic is going to be college basketball based. So, keep it locked here and we're going to have a great time. I'll be back maybe Wednesday, Thursday with another podcast. I'm traveling to Vegas to do Mountain West Media Day and WCC Media Day. So a lot of action coming up. But like I said, keep it locked to the Twitter account. Keep it locked to The Athletic. Keep it locked here. And until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.